Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about Blend for Best, which I'm pretty excited to be a part of. For those of you who have not attended a session with us yet, the way that you will interact with the presenters is that there is a questions panel. So you're welcome to utilize the questions panel for comments or questions. I know it's not posed as such, but you're welcome to leave comments instead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start us off with a quick poll so that we can get an idea of who's present with us right now. So if you can go ahead and choose one option, we would appreciate that. We'll give people a couple seconds to vote. I realize I did not introduce myself. My name is Gina Davis, and I am an education program specialist with Teen Labor and the PD coordinator for the state. Okay, great. So we have a good number of people who have voted here. So I'm going to share the results so you can see. So it looks like most of our people are ESL instructors, which is fitting. Some program administrators, instructional specialists, so a little peppering of everyone. So that's awesome. So thank you again for everyone joining us today. You'll be hearing from Katie Edwards from Howard Community College. If anyone has any questions or has any difficulties throughout the session, please go ahead and use that questions panel. But without further ado, go ahead, Katie.
Hi, thanks, Gina. Well, hi and good afternoon. I'm really glad to be here and yet at home. It's kind of nice. I wish I could see you in person, but thanks for showing up. I know it can be hard to engage while you are on your computer, but thanks for showing up. So as Gina said, my name is Katie Edwards. I'm the grant program coordinator and instructional specialist at Howard Community College's English Language Center. So today we're going to be talking about Blended for the Best, leveraging hybrid learning. So since the coronavirus closed down our schools, we have all become more dependent on technology. In fact, many of us have become, if not, experts, passable deliverers of remote instruction. But transposing your class online when it wasn't designed to be online isn't true online instruction. Most of us have probably been cobbling things together so far. In the before times, you hopefully relied on classroom technology integration to help you work more efficiently and engage with learners with things like Quizlet, Kahoots, projectors, dock cameras, YouTube videos, things like that. But blended or hybrid learning is a whole different ballgame. In this presentation, we're going to start with some definitions to make sure that we're on the same page. Then I will discuss why our program decided to design some low-level grant-funded ESL hybrid classes, that's a mouthful, to run specifically this summer. Then how they actually turned out, and some of the best practices that research shows. My hope is that you'll be able to take some of these ideas and see how you might use them in your own context. So throughout the presentation, as Gina mentioned, feel free to put your questions or comments in the question box. Thank you again for being here. So let's get started. So what is blended learning? What is hybrid learning? The Innovating Distance Education in Adult Learning IDEAL Consortium uses the following definitions. Blended learning is considered characterized by tight integration of the product, right, whatever curriculum you choose, into a broader curriculum and instructional program. In this case, instructors consider both in-class and online instruction as part of a collective whole, making adjustments to their face-to-face teaching based on what they see as they monitor student work online, and altering online assessments based on what they observe in class. Hybrid models, according to IDEAL, employ online curriculum and in-class teaching, but though the teacher is checking the online work, the assigned work isn't necessarily directly aligned to what's happening in the classroom. Interestingly enough, in Texas, hybrid also refers to programs that offer periods of in-class instruction followed by periods of online learning. EdTech states that if set 30 to 79% of a course is online, it's blended. Below that, you have a web facilitated course, and above that, you have a distance course. But for a truly blended or hybrid course, you have to have a substantial proportion of the content divided between online learning as well as face-to-face meetings. However, this quote sums it up rather nicely. Blended learning has become an evolving, responsive, and dynamic process that in many ways is organic, define attempts at universal definition. So that's kind of helpful. Many, if you get into this blended learning and hybrid learning field at all, start doing any research, you'll find that there are so many different definitions, which is very interesting considering that this field has been around for a while. So Ideal mentions that it's really up to local programs to use the language they think is most effective in their context. At Howard Community College, we call our classes hybrid. But if we go back to that definition that we were talking about, they're really a blended approach. I really don't think these terms matter, especially in this presentation, so much as the idea. So you'll see me use blended or hybrid kind of depending on what I'm talking about. Just don't worry about it, and remember that I'm talking about a class that is online and face-to-face. And again, if you have questions, feel free to chime in. So regardless of what we call it, I think that this quote sums up very well the tension we have when considering integrating technology even more. How can we leverage technology without being overly distracted by it? We don't want to have blended learning or hybrid learning or whatever you call it for its own sake, but for the sake of our students' learning. So when we were considering developing classes, we had to think through a few things, right? We were thinking about our low-level grant students, or specifically our ESL students, and we kind of thought through this process. What were the roadblocks to online instruction? What would make it worth it? Why not just do pure online learning instead of some sort of hybrid? So I'm not going to spend too long on this slide, although I'll spend a good amount of time because I think it's pretty easy to think through why online classes don't work. In fact, you might be thinking of how your classes did or didn't successfully turn to remote instruction this spring. So this might be things you already know, but I hope just putting this in a concrete platform will be helpful. Well, first, the truth is that online classes aren't necessarily desirable for most students. At HCC, we have offered fully online classes for a while for intensive or pay students. And even though they're aimed at higher level students, they honestly run with significantly fewer students than our traditional face-to-face courses. Of course, this might be changing due to COVID-19, but historically we've seen that students prefer to learn face-to-face. And unlike a traditional course, online and blended learning requires more persistence and habits of mind for students. Students are given more autonomy to make sure they do their work. They need to carve out space in their schedule and honestly, even in their homes. And many students just may not have the discipline or organizational skills to be successful at this. Additionally, the truth is that not all students are successful online. A study by researchers at the Community College Research Center at Columbia University found that almost all groups of students didn't do as well in either completion or grades earned in fully online classes as in in-person courses. Older students in particular were less likely to complete online courses than in-person courses. Now, note here that this research did not include blended learning, but it's possible that blended learning and blended learning students may fit the same pattern. And of course, technology. For both students and teachers, there may be a lack of comfort with technology. Van Eck in 2017 writes that a major factor for the implementation of blended learning is teacher preparedness, and comfort level using online technologies. And Stonehocker in 2017 as well agrees, saying there must be buy-in from all involved in training for teachers. Now, this doesn't even cover a student's comfort or discomfort. I vividly remember sitting in one of our registration sessions a few years ago, talking with a student who really wanted to get his GED, and he would have benefited from our GED for ESL science course. But that semester it was a hybrid, and he was a little too intimidated and decided against registering for the course. Besides just comfort, there's something that may be added to the comfort, which is just lack of access to technology. We know that while many of our students may have access to smartphones, many don't have access to reliable internet, data, a computer, um, things that will make technology easier. So for us, at least back in pre-COVID days, it didn't make sense for us to do pure online instruction. There were too many variables that kind of pointed us to, hey, maybe that's not the best idea for our students. I'm not going to try to address all those roadblocks. They are valid, and you should really realistically assess what your program or your class's specific barriers are. However, despite all the negatives, there were some compelling reasons why we even wanted to consider creating blended classes. The first one is limitations. As I briefly mentioned in the beginning, these classes that we'll be talking about more are summer classes. They're actually happening right now. Um, and usually we run a very limited number of classes in the summer. Plus, we're dealing with a mix of student availability. So we thought that one way we could get around that was by creating hybrid courses. Bowman in 2010 describes an advantage of synchronous learning as that as long as students complete their assignments by the weekly due date, they can do the work whenever it suits them best. Additionally, we are getting more of a push from state and federal government to push for digital literacy and distance education. Funders are asking, how are you incorporating hybrid or online learning? And they have a valid point. Are there students out there who would be able to learn more or who would be able to take a class who wouldn't be able to if we just offered face-to-face classes? You know, the summer slump is real, and we notice that it happens with our students. So wouldn't it be great if we could alleviate that? Those two factors wouldn't be enough to push us to create some new courses, however. We also have resources at the ready, and we felt like now was the time to leverage them. For years, HCC has used Canvas as our LMS, and we have a computer lab that we have traditionally used for higher level students. We also have a program called Reading Horizons that we've used in our literacy classes for many years. And like many of you, we have purchased seats with Burlington English. So all of this kind of made creating the content much easier than if we were going to use our regular textbooks, which didn't exactly transition to this blended learning approach quite as easily. Finally, we were able to look back on our past experiences with other hybrid courses at HCC. So like I mentioned earlier, we've had a GED for our ESL science course as hybrid, as well as an English for Careers cybersecurity course. That's the one I have taught this past spring. Now, both of these involved higher level learners, but paired with the use of Reading Horizons and Burlington English integrated into a few of our lower level courses, we thought that, hey, maybe we could bring additional instruction to lower level students using a blended or hybrid model. So blended learning leverages the best of both traditional and face-to-face instruction. Think about the benefits of in-class instruction. I know you know them. You use them every day, or well, you used to. Being able to easily pull students into groups, engaging in choral repetition, interactive activities, using manipulatives, etc. There's so much that we can do in class. We saw some of this in our prior blended courses. And the GED for Science, they used kind of a flipped classroom approach and spent the face-to-face time discussing topics and actually using complex vocabulary. In the cybersecurity class, we incorporated activities that were difficult to do online. Things like running dictation, which if you don't know it, do some Googling. It's an awesome, awesome activity. We found, though, that also online instruction provided some great opportunities for students to engage with the material and get those touches that Keith Foltz mentions being so necessary to learn vocabulary. You could review material and look it over when students had the time. I taught cybersecurity in the spring, like I said, and it was fascinating to watch students redo activities they had completed because they wanted to get it perfect. That's not really something that's easy to do in a traditional face-to-face classes. I noticed that students would watch videos, both mine and those I found, multiple times to make sure they were understood, and they could do this at their own pace and at their own level. Now, I also want to add that there is some fascinating data that suggests that leveraging both types of instruction, online and face-to-face, benefits students the most. Now, there isn't a ton of research specifically on gains that students make, so do take this with a grain of salt. But according to data from Texas, blended learning may be more effective for adult learners than only face-to-face learning or only online learning. Data from Texas Educating Adult Management System shows that adult learners who engage in blended learning outperform learners who only attend a traditional classroom, and learners receive more than 50% of their contact hours at a difference. The data is even stronger for English language learners, as you can see. The caveat again is that this isn't a formal peer-reviewed study, but it is an analysis of program data. So even with that caveat, there are questions, of course, of why is this, right? Is it because students are receiving more instruction? Is it about persistence, since these students need to be motivated to do work outside the classroom? Is it the development of self-efficacy? Is it that the students taking blended learning classes would already be successful? Honestly, I don't know. Um, and this is certainly a cutting edge research that needs to be done. But according to Staker and Horn in 2012, blended learning can be used to personalize and stream course content in a way that creates more optimal and more tailored learning. So there are clearly benefits for our students. With all of this positive, negative experience, data, lack of data, we decided to move forward and develop some new classes. So pre-pandemic, the plan was to run two multi-level courses using Reading Horizons and Burlington English. So one would use Reading Horizons, a reading lab, and the other would use Burlington English as a comprehensive English class. We figured that a multi-level course would probably be the most ideal since we had no clue how many students would be interested, and we wanted to increase the chances of the classes actually running. So like I said earlier, we had been using Reading Horizon in our literacy classes for several years and had created a combined class with two of our lowest level readers. And we saw a lot of success with that. Additionally, I had seen success of this program with my more advanced students when I was teaching the reading and writing course. So I knew that the platform had a wide range for a wide variety of students. And as I mentioned, we had used Burlington English in two of our career classes, which was a bookkeeping class and a computer class. And we really liked the program, but we didn't see a way to make it fit in our current comprehensive classes because we have a really good thing going with the future textbooks and a lot of material too. So that was the plan. And the plan, again, was to recruit from current students. We'd plan on using the computer lab for a special registration session, during which we'd screen them using North Star's digital literacy assessment to make sure they at least had some basic computer skills. Now, if you are not familiar with North Star, they have a lot of different assessments you can take, including internet basics and basic computer skills, and it's free, pretty easy to use. So I definitely recommend checking them out if you haven't before. The plan was to require students to attend an in-person orientation so they could get familiar not only with the technology, but expectations as well, right? That they would be doing work on their own as well as in the classroom, because this is a big switch from, a traditional face-to-face class. And so we wanted to provide support in both ways. The classes would be broken into two parts: asynchronous online work and in-person instruction. So the students would work at their own pace and their own level. using assigned lessons for Burlington English, and then according to ability on reading horizons, since there is a assessment you can take that will then direct where you go for a certain number of hours every week. And then they would meet in person once a week for in-person instruction. And that instruction would include both lab teachers and an instructor to help with technical assistance, as well as small group instruction for specific encouragement in pronunciation, doing learning activities, all of those things that we talked about you can do in the classroom, but is difficult to do outside of the classroom. Well, obviously that didn't quite happen. Once the pandemic hit, we had to pivot and think about how we would change our hybrid courses to kind of online ones, like all of you, I'm sure. Thankfully, we were able to use our experience in transitioning our courses in the spring to really inform some of the decisions that we made. So what we actually ended up doing is creating 3 separate courses: a comprehensive English class, a reading lab, and a computer skills course. I'm not going to talk too much about the computer skills course right now, but if you have questions about it, feel free to shoot me an email or ask questions in the chat box right now. But the big change that we switched was from being multi-level to being broken out into 3 separate levels. So pre-beginning, level 1, and level 2. And these are our levels, not NRS levels, just so you know. And the reason why is because there were honestly no other options for students at the lowest levels. So we thought, well, if they want to take a class, they don't have quite as much of a choice. And then we thought we could always condense the classes if we needed to. So what we did was we recruited from current students, just like we were planning. But instead of administering an assessment, we figured that if students were able to complete their online course in the spring and to join the Zoom registration session, which was complicated, they'd probably be okay in an online class. Now, instead of having an orientation, though, their first meetings and introduction to their platforms would be the first Zoom session. So let me break down what that class actually looked like. So the actual classes had to be adapted as well, since we clearly weren't able to do that face-to-face instruction. Students are still doing asynchronous online work, right? They're meeting also for synchronous Zoom meetings. Now, it's not an even split. Students are supposed to spend 5 hours a week doing asynchronous online work and then 90 minutes once a week on Zoom. So these Zoom meetings are not quite in person, obviously, but they're also not, just online. So I'm going to call them, face-to-face, remote face-to-face, which is great. I think research really bears up that and says that face-to-face support is a necessary element with online education. And when we can't be in person, face-to-face via screen isn't so bad either. I've been listening to webinars like you guys, and I've heard of some people who have been doing office hours and things like that for their students over Zoom or whatever platform. And so clearly there's something that is helpful about that. So how's it going? So like I said, our summer classes are going on right now. They started on May 18th, and we didn't end up running full classes for all the levels. But we were able to change our pre-beginning and our level 1 reading classes to tutoring. On a side note, it's very interesting to me that many of our students need that reading instruction, but they kind of shy away from that and say, oh, let me do the speaking too. But anyway, this has actually worked out really well, as students seem to appreciate the extra one-on-one time and the tailored instruction. Although students were all returning, we had some confusion with accessing Canvas or Zoom, Canvas being our LMS, as I mentioned earlier, or figuring out exactly what time their meetings were and when they were. And then this probably had to do something with the fact that in the spring, we had Zoom sessions, but they were optional. And in the summer, we have made them required. Something that was interesting is that most of the teachers, most of our instructors have mentioned that they want more synchronous time with students, and we're really curious to see what students say. We're going to be doing some surveying towards the end of the semester and get feedback that will hopefully inform our classes for the future. So I have a few quotes that I'd like to share with you. These are from our great instructors, including, I'll do a shout out to Jay Lynn and April Wagner and Coleman Caldwell. So Coleman mentioned that he really had to show students what they needed to do and how to navigate in the platform. Specifically, he was using Reading Horizons. And so this is something where I say, oh, I wish we could have had that in-person orientation session. That would have been really helpful. April mentioned that she has been able to get extra one-on-one instruction for students who needed it, but in the future, it'd be really nice to have extra time. And then I think this was a quote from Jay, who talked about the fact that, can't actually see what it says, something, but it's a good quote. All right. So most of our teachers had noticed that students had been committed to attending the Zoom sessions, and they really appreciated getting to build somewhat of a community. Now, to adjust for student schedules, we're having teachers run class in the morning and class in the evening. Now, students don't have to go to both those classes, but the instructors do. So it's a lot for the instructors, but really helpful, I think, since we may not have had enough students for separate day and evening sections. According to the instructors, students seem to really be enjoying the material, both in Reading Horizons and Burlington English. So they've given really good feedback to the teachers about it. But we have also found that students have been struggling to complete work on their own. The very first week, in fact, very few students completed the requisite number of hours on the online platforms. Now, it's increased some, but there is a huge variation in how much time students spend per week, literally ranging from minutes to over 10 hours. Now, I think this is probably the biggest question and takeaway for us. Why aren't students doing that work? It doesn't seem to be an issue of material, but could it be unclear expectations? Could it be the fact that it's such a different way of learning? Is it lack of time? Honestly, I'm not sure if we can get to the bottom of this, but certainly asking this question will inform our practice in the fall as we continue with remote instruction and in the future when we can offer hybrid classes for real. So again, these quotes from our teachers, the fact that it really has to do with learner motivation and that it's an individual choice, right? Some students are doing the work, some students are not spending enough time. Some of our instructors are adding additional material to make it even more challenging and a great course for their students. So I do just want to thank our instructors for pivoting so well and just doing a great job trying something new. Oh, and on that note, I'd like to end our time together by sharing some practices, best practices that both our experience and research seems to back up. So as you're thinking about your classes, as you're thinking about your programs, as you're thinking about your particular students, these are a few things that you should keep in mind. One of the things that got me really excited about Burlington English and the possibility of using it this summer was their development of a program called CORE, which are courses that can be done entirely on mobile devices. So this spring, like many of you, I'm sure, we saw that so many students didn't have computers or didn't have reliable internet, but they did have devices. And this really holds true to what the Pew Research Center shows. According to them, 96% of Americans now own a cell phone of some kind, and 81% have a smartphone. The increase in the last few years is staggering. In fact, in 2011, just a few years ago, and the first time they asked this question, only 35% owned a smartphone. And I encourage you to check out all the research that the Pew Research Center does, and it has direct implications for what kind of hybrid learning we offer. So 1 in 5 Americans use smartphones as their access to the internet. They don't have access to broadband, but they have smartphones. So mobile devices can empower students in their learning. They can give them options and greater control over where and how they learn. If students can access interactive practice exercises, they can more effectively use, that short period of time that they have while they're, you know, doing work or taking a break or playing with their kids, right? We know that students need a great deal of input and repetitive practice in in order to be successful at language learning. And mobile devices loaded with audio, video, games, content are ideal for this purpose. Fell and Simon in 2012 mentioned that mobile phones are especially useful for language learning, which really makes sense. How many of you have used Duolingo, right, and have practice in whatever your language of choice is? It's easy when you have it right there. And that is certainly something we want to keep in mind for our students. However, great instruction isn't just about giving students an app or a login. Instructors need to be considered a facilitator, an encourager, a coach. Um, they should be there to assist students to see where they're struggling. Teachers really have to be a little bit more intentional about this. And again, in a true hybrid class where you're meeting face to face, use that face-to-face time to check in with students to see how their online work is going, to make sure that they are understanding the expectations, but also the technical aspects of things. And this can obviously be a challenge with larger classes, and certainly is a challenge when we're doing an online hybrid class. This quote from Marchetti and Foss is from a study done with deaf and hard of hearing students, but I really think that it can be extrapolated to include all students, right? Students in online courses with more interaction outperform students in online courses with less interaction. This seems to make sense with what we know, right? Students want interaction. Indeed, they need interaction to be successful, and not just from the teacher, right? Interaction with the teacher is not enough. Think about classes like a MOOC, a massive online open course, right? Where you can enroll and you can log in and you can do stuff, but if you're interacting with the teacher, it's not that much. And maybe you're posting something on a discussion board that somebody wrote, months ago or years ago. So you're not actually interacting with the material in the same way, and you're not actually interacting with your classmates in the same way. In 2006, Adams states that collaboration in a social learning environment is a vital element, and an online learning environment is no exception. So in both remote instruction and hybrid courses, this can be facilitated through Zoom sessions, discussion boards. There's a lot of creative thinking out there about how to take activities for the classroom and make them appropriate for an online platform. But again, if you're able to have face-to-face classes and a truly hybrid course, you can think about ways that you can get that same atmosphere in the classroom into the online space. Again, with the caveat that there are benefits to an online environment, and there are ways that we can do things online that it's not the same as in person. I think about Facebook, for example. The way we interact on Facebook is different than the way we interact in person. And that's a fine thing. So think about ways that you can learn from your online experiences, and where are the places that you interact? Where are the places that you're reluctant to interact? And how can you bring that into the classroom? One small thing I did with my cybersecurity class was have them take pictures of themselves for profile pictures in Canvas so that students could see who they were talking to, because let's face it, nobody remembers names. It was a small thing, but a thing that made it easier to interact and to remember when we went back to the classroom. Oh yeah, you posted this, didn't you? Yeah, let's continue that conversation. It was really neat to see that. Um, and I think could be it's a very simple way to foster interaction. And we need to make sure that our content is excellent. Um, there's a lot of stuff out there, right? There's a huge amount of stuff out there. But figuring out what the appropriate materials are, um, is it good? Is it appropriate? Does it suit your students' needs? Does it suit your class's needs? Like you, I've been attending webinars, receiving emails, and I'll be honest, it can be a little overwhelming. I'm excited to check out the OER presentation later with the Virtual Training Institute. But yeah, it can still be overwhelming. But again, you want to consider your resources, your students, your needs, and choose or create excellent content and curriculum. So you'll notice that creating something is an option. So it just depends on, again, what you're comfortable with. You'll notice I didn't talk a lot about platforms, although I did mention Canvas and Reading Horizons and Burlington English. But I think the ideas behind them are more important than figuring out, oh, I need this specific thing. So yes, definitely please consider how you can find excellent content. So I'm hoping that we can have enough time for some questions if you guys have any. So I really hope that soon I'll be hearing even more about different ways that folks are leveraging the best of online and face-to-face instruction to better serve the needs of our students. Like I said, there's a lot of great content and resources out there. I will also plug that if you're interested, Ideal 101 is a course that I took, and it is a great resource. So think through your experiences in the classroom. Think through your experiences with online or remote learning. Probably, if you're like teachers in our program, you've had some experience this past semester, and you may have more experience in the fall. Hopefully you're starting to learn what are the things that you can do online that you can't do in the class. What are the things that you can do in the class that you can't do online? And is there a way to take both of those and mix them together so that your students are getting that extra practice? Your students are getting that interaction between classmates. They're getting the input, they're getting the repetition, they're getting an excellent instruction. So just think, I really would encourage you to think through what you've discovered about your students, whether that's access to technology, comfort or lack of comfort in technology. What have you discovered about your abilities? Are you better at using Zoom than posting things on Canvas or your personal LMS? How can you grow your abilities? What have you discovered about best practices, right? I shared a few of the ones that really jumped out to me, but what are some things that you have learned about this sort of hybrid or blended learning? And what have you learned about available resources? Again, I know it can be overwhelming, but hopefully I provided you with some inspiration as well. And so think about all the things that you have learned over this pandemic and how you can use what you have learned in this, one day when we're not in the same crisis anyway. So I'll leave you with this final quote and my email address in case you later have some questions and you realize, I wanted to ask you this. Again, if you have questions, you can put them in the box. So technology does not in and of itself produce learning. It simply amplifies and extends instructional strategies. So this is true whether we're talking about online learning or blended learning. So again, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Katie. This has been wonderful. We always benefit from hearing each other's experiences. I find it just so incredibly valuable. So if everyone can take a moment I'm going to put a feedback survey in the chat box so that we can get anonymous feedback regarding this session. If anyone has any additional questions for Katie, like she said, you can either email her, email me, and I'll put you in touch. All of our sessions will be recorded with the actual presentations being put on the website at a later date. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Katie, if you want to go ahead and unmute or turn your webcam off, you
All
also
right.
have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye.